Hello and welcome to Embrace the Deception, and episode 3 of our Spot the Lie series. In this episode, Rudy will be telling us two stories. One is a totally truthful tale, and the other is a fabricated fairy tale of fakery, and it's your job to determine which is which. After Rudy tells his two stories, we will reveal which story is true and which is false, and then we'll look at some of the clues we could have picked up on to tell the difference. Here we go. We're going to start with a baseline where Rudy will answer a few of our questions truthfully so we can see what he looks like when telling the truth.
Hi, how you doing? My name is Rudy Becerra. I'm from Roseville, California. I have two half-brothers, one sister. And what I ate for breakfast was a muffin with milk. And my favorite subject at school was history because I just like learning about old stuff. True facts and stuff like that. Interesting things. So my first story is going to be about an embarrassing moment. I was sitting there in high school one year and everyone was quiet, the teacher's, doing what she does. And I happened to have fallen asleep. So I'm still sleeping, having a good dream, I guess. And all of a sudden, I hear and I jumped up, and everyone's sitting there laughing at me like, what the hell? I farted so loud I woke myself up, and it was pretty embarrassing. So my greatest fear, I think my greatest fear would be to be forgotten when I pass away. When I die, that I'm forgotten, not left a mark here in the world, not left a legacy or anything to remember me by. And that's it. So the true story is my embarrassing moment. The false story is, of course, my fear. I don't really care what I do when I leave here. I'll be gone. Who cares? Thank you.
Now that you've seen both of Rudy's stories and you know which one is the truth and which one was made up, we're going to go back and analyze them and see what kind of clues we could have picked up on to be able to tell the difference. And I want to start by just going through his baseline real quick.
Hi, how you doing? My name is Rudy Becerra. I'm from Roseville, California.
So he does a lot of interclasped fingers and hand wringing, just kind of like a self-soothing gesture. That can be a red flag, a possible sign of deception. But if someone does it during their baseline when they're telling the truth, then it's something we'll ignore when we're looking at his stories and trying to figure out which one is true and which one is false.
Was a muffin, true facts and stuff like that. Interesting things.
So there he licked his lips a little bit too, and that can also be a sign of when you stick your tongue out like he did, that could be a sign that something is distasteful. But it could just be dry in his room and he could just be moistening his lips. So that's one that is often a sign that you can point to, but you have to take it in context. You also have to look for clusters because one red flag is never enough to say, aha, they were lying. So let's look at his true story and see if we see anything interesting.
So my first story is going to be about an embarrassing moment.
See, there he does some lip compression, which is often a sign of withholding, and that's often a sign, a red flag of possible deception. However, in this case, he's getting ready to tell an embarrassing story, and seeing withholding is, it could be congruent. A lot of people are not necessarily excited to share an embarrassing story, so seeing a sign of withholding, not necessarily a red flag in this case.
I was sitting there in high school one year, and
we also see this look of contempt right here. When you see one corner of the mouth go out, an asymmetrical smile, this one's actually going down, so it's more of like a frowny face. But when you see one corner of the mouth go out, That's contempt. Now, contempt can mean several different things. It could be a feeling of superiority over somebody else, but the same expression can also be pride. If your kid wins a trophy in Little League, you might make that one-sided smile, which is in the family of contempt. It's also a face, and since his is kind of going down, like a sad face, and it's on one side, it's in the family of contempt, but that looks like a face someone might make if they're admitting to something they're not proud of. So if you took the last cookie and your friend really wanted it, you might go, yeah, I took the last cookie. So it could be a sign that he's admitting to something he's embarrassed by. So again, this one could be congruent. So there are a couple of red flags there that someone might go, aha, there's a lie. You know, he did the lip compression or the contempt, but you got to take it in context because those things could be congruent.
Everyone was quiet, teachers, doing what she does. And I happened to have fallen asleep. So I'm still sleeping, having a good dream, I guess.
So one thing he does here that is a red flag, and remember, one red flag does not mean someone's lying, but he switches tenses. He's telling a story, and he's speaking in past tense, but then he says,
I'm still sleeping, having a good dream, I guess.
I'm still sleeping, having a good dream, I guess. So he switches from past tense to present tense. That is often a red flag to keep an eye out for. But again, if you see one red flag in isolation, it doesn't necessarily mean anything.
And all of a sudden, I hear and I jumped up, and everyone's sitting there laughing at me like, what the hell? I farted so loud I woke myself up.
And there we see surprise, the eyebrows up and the eyes wide open. When he says, I farted so loud I woke myself up, he shows surprise, and that's congruent. So in his true story, there was only one red flag that would be something that would alert me most of the time, and that would be switching from past tense to present tense when you're recalling a story. But there were a couple of things that I can see people possibly misinterpreting. The lip compression and the look that's in the family of contempt. Those things could have been misinterpreted, but in this case, telling an embarrassing story, I think those facial expressions are congruent with someone who's talking about something embarrassing. So that was his true story, and now let's take a look at his fabricated fable.
So my greatest fear, I think my greatest fear would be to be forgotten when I pass away.
So what I see here is he turns to the side a little bit, and that might not be anything. He might just be shifting because it's comfortable to sit that way, but sometimes people will turn away to try to get away from the lie. So that is a red flag. Now, if we see another red flag in rapid succession, then we have a cluster.
Pass away. When I die, that I'm forgotten, not left a mark here in the world, not left a legacy or anything to remember me by.
So I saw something else there that it wasn't in super close succession to the turning away, so we might have to ignore that one. But right here, we see a micro expression of anger in the eyebrows coming down, and disgust. The nose crinkles up and the lip goes up. He's talking about his greatest fear. We would expect to see fear or possibly sadness if he's talking about his greatest fear being that when he dies, he won't have left a legacy and people will forget who he is. That might make someone sad, the thought of that. So we would expect to see fear and sadness, and instead we see anger and disgust. That's incongruent. And then right after that, we have the mouth closed. And I know we saw that in his baseline, but the fact that it comes right after the other red flag, we see the anger and disgust, and then immediately the mouth with the tight lips. And the tight lips last longer than they did in the baseline. So let me just play that back a little bit.
I'm forgotten, not left a mark here in the world, not left a legacy or anything to remember.
There's the anger and disgust, and as soon as he finishes a sentence, right into the lip compression, and it lasts longer that time.
Anything to remember me by.
So that was his made-up story, and it can be difficult sometimes to tell which is the truth and which is the lie in these stories. One reason for that is because the stakes aren't very high. In the Spot the Lie series, I just have people telling me a true story and a false story, and then we have to figure out which is which. But they don't have anything to gain if they trick you and get you to believe a false story, and they don't have anything to lose if they don't trick you and you catch them in their lie. The stakes aren't very high. When the stakes are high and you've got something to gain by lying or something to lose by getting caught, there's a lot more emotion and there's a lot more what's called leakage, where your true emotions leak out even if you're trying to hide them, or the truth finds a way to escape. When the stakes are high, there's a lot more emotion and it makes it easier to spot lies. So in his true story, there were a couple of potential red flags that could be misinterpreted. And in his false story, there was one red flag early on, which was the turning away, which is easy to overlook. It may or may not mean anything. And the next red flag doesn't come immediately afterwards. There's a little bit of space, so it's not part of a cluster.
Left a mark here in the world, not left a legacy or anything to remember me.
That micro expression, there was two different micro expressions. There was anger and disgust. So since there are two different expressions, I guess you can make the argument that that would form a cluster. It's two or more. But then it's also followed very quickly by the lip compression.
Or anything to remember me by.
So I guess that's enough to form a cluster. Even though we saw that lip compression during his baseline, that normally if you see something during a baseline, you would kind of ignore it, but then we would only have the anger and disgust micro expression. So that's what makes it tough. If you only see one red flag, it doesn't form a cluster. So you got to be careful about accusing someone of lying unless you see lots of red flags. But in this situation, that's all we have to work with. So I would pick the incongruent micro expressions. That's a pretty reliable indicator when the body language and the words don't match. If you're talking about something that is your greatest fear and that might possibly make you sad and you show anger and disgust, that's incongruent. So when the body language and the words don't match, that's a pretty good indicator. So that's why I would have picked that one as the false story. Anyway, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment, subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon so you don't miss any future videos. And if you'd like to help us out with the Spot the Lie project, you can submit your own truth and lie video. There are instructions on my website on how to do that, and there's a link to those instructions in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.